Mr. Speaker, I was the prosecutor that brought the first case. And when that file was brought to my attention, Mr. Speaker, I noticed that one of the defendants had not been prosecuted previously. Far from covering up, I asked for that file so that I could have a look at it. On the back of that, I then changed the entire approach to prosecutions, which was then lauded by the government. We were doing the right thing and brought those prosecutions. So my record was going after where I thought something had gone wrong and putting it right. She stayed silent throughout their years in government, and so did the entire front bench.
Just moments after a landmark Supreme Court ruling shook the foundations of British law, Sir Keir Starmer was booed openly, viciously by members of Parliament in what is now being called the most humiliating moment of his political career. The chamber fell into uproar. Shouts, despair, accusations of betrayal. Within minutes, footage went viral. Has the Labour leader just lost control of his own party? Or worse, has the British public just witnessed the beginning of a political implosion? Because this isn't just about a court decision. This is about power, trust, and the very future of British democracy. And now all eyes are on Keir Starmer. Not as a leader, but as a man caught in a storm of his own making. It started with a single decision, quiet at first, calm. But beneath the legal language and tightly worded verdict was a political earthquake that no one in Westminster was prepared for. This morning, the UK Supreme Court delivered a ruling that sent shockwaves through Parliament, striking down a central pillar of the government's agenda. A move so unexpected, so defiant, that it left ministers reeling and the Prime Minister's office scrambling for answers. But while Rishi Sunak absorbed the legal blow behind closed doors, the explosion came elsewhere. On the opposition benches, Keir Starmer had waited years for this. A legal triumph that could redefine the balance of power. But as he rose to speak in the House of Commons, expecting applause, what he received instead was a brutal, unfiltered backlash, booing, jeering. Even from members who once stood behind him, the man who once held the moral high ground now stood isolated, visibly rattled, as murmurs of betrayal filled the air. In a chamber built on centuries of tradition, such open revolt isn't common, and yet this moment was anything but ordinary. The ruling itself was clear. The government had acted unlawfully, violating the principles of fairness, transparency, and constitutional integrity. But the court didn't just strike down a policy, it struck at the heart of political authority. And Keir Starmer, despite standing in opposition, had somehow become a symbol of everything the public now feared: compromise, silence, and moral ambiguity. While the Conservative front bench scrambled to contain fallout, it was Starmer who became the lightning rod for fury. Why? Because for weeks, no months, he had avoided taking a definitive stand, carefully walking a tightrope, trying not to offend, trying not to commit. But in a time of national uncertainty, that silence was no longer seen as strategy, it was seen as cowardice. And when the ruling landed, when the public cried out for a leader to speak truth, to show courage, Keir Starmer offered legalese and parliamentary caution. For many, it was the final betrayal. The media didn't hold back. Headlines screamed of division, crisis, collapse. Starmer booed in Commons chaos. Labour leader loses control. Where's the spine? Social media ignited like wildfire. Within minutes, clips of the Commons eruption were trending across every major platform. Hashtags exploded. Hashtag Starmer shamed. Hashtag Labour divided. Even Labour insiders leaked messages of fury, MPs whispering about leadership challenges, accusing Starmer of failing the moment, of blinking when Britain needed steel. And then came the backlash from the public, constituents calling offices in outrage, Labour voters declaring betrayal. Even party donors went quiet. Because while the ruling should have been a moment of triumph for the opposition, a legal dagger in the heart of a weakened government, it instead revealed something darker, a vacuum, a moral absence, and a leader without a voice. Behind the scenes, the Labour Party went into panic. Emergency meetings, calls to PR teams, messaging strategies rewritten on the fly. But the damage had already been done. In the eyes of many, Starmer had not just miscalculated, he had exposed a truth they long suspected. that the man promising principle might in the end be just another politician. And in a post-Brexit Britain, still scarred, still angry, that was unforgivable. But this wasn't just about optics. Insiders now reveal that tensions within Labour have reached boiling point. Frontbenchers furious over being left out of key decisions. Whispers of a shadow cabinet reshuffle. Even the possibility, unthinkable until now, that Starmer could face internal revolt before the next general election. Not because he lost to the Tories, but because he failed to lead when it mattered most. And all of this, every rumour, every headline, every furious whisper in the halls of power stems from a single truth. When the court exposed the government's wrongdoing, it also exposed something else. A terrifying question lingering in the minds of millions. If Keir Starmer can't lead in crisis, how can he lead a country? The courtroom was silent, eerily silent, just seconds before the ruling was delivered. But when the words finally came, they didn't land softly. They detonated. A unanimous decision. No dissent, no ambiguity. The UK Supreme Court had not only ruled against the government, it had condemned it. With precise language sharpened like a blade, the judges outlined what they called a fundamental breach of constitutional duty. And though the case had been presented as a narrow legal technicality, the verdict spoke to something far more explosive: the erosion of democratic accountability at the highest levels of power. At the heart of it all was a policy crafted in the shadows. A legislative manoeuvre rushed through the corridors of Whitehall, cloaked in legal jargon and shielded from proper scrutiny. A policy that, according to the court, violated the core principles of lawful governance. The judgment laid bare how ministers had bypassed parliamentary oversight, manipulated legal frameworks and misled both the public and MPs. This wasn't merely a setback, it was a direct assault on the legitimacy of executive authority. But here's where the story turns darker, because this wasn't a rogue policy conceived in haste. This was deliberate, calculated, designed to push the limits of legal boundaries while avoiding political consequences. And while Rishi Sunak's cabinet bore the brunt of the legal humiliation, the court's language cut across party lines. It warned that silence in the face of constitutional abuse is complicity, that those who refuse to condemn wrongdoing, out of caution or fear or ambition, are just as culpable as those who enact it. And that is where Keir Starmer's nightmare truly began. As former Director of Public Prosecutions, he was supposed to be the country's moral compass, the man who understood justice not just as a principle, but as a duty. Yet when the judgment was read, when the government's deceit was exposed in black and white, Starmer did not rise with righteous fury. He did not denounce the abuse of power. He did not demand resignations. Instead, he wavered, he hedged, he calculated. And in doing so, he triggered something he couldn't control. An emotional revolt, not just in Parliament, but across the nation. Because in that silence, something snapped. MPs who had once quietly grumbled about his cautious style now erupted. They accused him of being spineless, of protecting his public image at the cost of principle. Long-time Labour loyalists turned their backs in the Commons chamber, their faces twisted with disappointment. Whispers of discontent turned to roars. Some shouted, "Shame," others booed. It wasn't political theatre, it was betrayal, painted in real time on the canvas of British democracy. And yet the moral collapse didn't stop there. As the Supreme Court's judgment circulated, so did classified briefings, leaked documents, memos never meant to see the light of day. They showed that both government and opposition figures had prior knowledge of the legal risks, that civil servants had warned of constitutional breaches, that legal advisers had raised red flags, only to be ignored, dismissed, silenced. And now those buried warnings were crawling back into the light, dragging with them a trail of political corpses the public watched in horror. Across Britain, the story shifted from legal technicalities to a larger, more horrifying realisation that no one in power was willing to stop the abuse. That even in the opposition, where moral clarity should have been strongest, ambition had choked conscience. Starmer had built his leadership on the promise of integrity. But now that promise lay in ruins. Outside Parliament, the streets trembled. Protests began to swell, small at first, then massive. From Manchester to Bristol, from Glasgow to London, citizens marched not just against the government, but against the system that had failed them. Banners read, "We were lied to," and "No more silence." For the first time in years, the political fury wasn't partisan, it was universal, a collective scream from a country betrayed. Inside the Labour Party, panic metastasised. Whips struggled to control the messaging. MPs refused media appearances. Shadow ministers began drafting letters of no confidence, anonymous for now, but venomous in intent. The word mutiny returned to Westminster, echoing through corridors last haunted during the Corbyn collapse. But this time, the crisis was different. It wasn't about ideology. It wasn't left versus centre. It was about something deeper, something moral. Donors, once generous with Starmer's coffers, now froze contributions. Think tanks, once aligned with Labour's reform agenda, began distancing themselves. The Guardian, The Beast, even traditionally neutral outlets started airing brutal op-eds, dissecting Starmer's failure in minute detail. "He stood at the edge of history," one columnist wrote, and chose silence. Meanwhile, Downing Street remained oddly quiet. Sources suggested Rishi Sunak had been blindsided by the ruling, yet was relishing Starmer's humiliation. One insider described it as a gift from the gods. Another claimed the Tory backbenchers were being urged to stay quiet, to let Labour tear itself apart while the Conservatives licked their wounds behind closed doors. But in private, government aides were terrified because the Supreme Court's decision had opened a legal Pandora's box. More cases were now being drafted. Human rights groups were preparing fresh challenges. Whistleblowers were emboldened. The precedent had been set and no one knew where it would lead. Yet amid all this chaos, one question echoed above the rest. Why did Keir Starmer freeze? Why didn't the former prosecutor stand up and defend the rule of law with the fire he once reserved for criminal courts? Why did he watch a historic judgment unfold and do nothing? Was it fear? Was it political strategy? Or was it something far worse, something hollow at the centre of his character? And as the walls close in, as the rebellion brews behind Labour's front bench, the public's anger shows no signs of fading. Because when democracy was wounded in full view of the nation, the man who once promised to heal it, he simply walked away. They thought they could contain it, that if they held their nerve for 24 hours, maybe 48, the storm would pass. But this wasn't just another scandal. This was a firestorm. And by the third day, the Labour leader's office was drowning in it. Because the silence had not only angered the public, it had fractured the very foundation beneath Keir Starmer's leadership. Now, as leaks pour out of his inner circle, a far more disturbing truth is emerging. This collapse wasn't an accident. It was foreseen, it was warned, and it was ignored. It began with a voice message, anonymous, leaked to a journalist late into the night. A senior Labour aide, his voice tight, almost trembling, describing how Starmer had been briefed weeks before the Supreme Court ruling. He was told the government's legal position was untenable. He was warned that the fallout could spark a constitutional reckoning, and still he did nothing. "We advised him to prepare a full response," the aide said. He said we'd watch the mood first. He said, don't overreact. But the country didn't wait, the court didn't wait, and now neither will the rebels. Within hours, more recordings surfaced, text messages, internal memos, meetings where senior advisors debated how to spin the inevitable crisis. One document, now circulating among political journalists, reveals a chilling strategy memo. Avoid full condemnation. Maintain ambiguity. Let the Tories self-implode. It was cynical, calculated, but above all, it exposed a fatal flaw at the heart of Starmer's leadership. He wasn't trying to lead Britain. He was trying to manage optics. The fallout has been apocalyptic. Inside Labour HQ, staff are shell-shocked. Morale is shattered. Long-serving aides are handing in resignations. Junior MPs, once silent, once loyal, have gone public. They accuse Starmer of arrogance, of detachment, of betraying the very justice he built his career upon. One MP, shaking with fury, told reporters, "We needed fire." He gave us fog. We needed principle. He gave us PR. Another, speaking anonymously, warned we're in a leadership crisis. Whether we admit it or not, it's already here. But the most devastating blow came not from MPs or aides, but from the public. A new poll released just this morning shows Labour's lead collapsing by 7 points overnight, the sharpest drop since Starmer took power. And buried deep in the data is something even more frightening. Trust in Starmer's integrity has plummeted, not just among swing voters, among core Labour supporters, working class voters, union members, lifelong Labour families who once believed he was different. They now see him as no better than the very elites they were trying to replace. And yet, amid the wreckage, something more dangerous is stirring. A movement, not just discontent, but organised rebellion. Whispers of a leadership challenge are now being spoken aloud. Frontbenchers once locked in Starmer's orbit have begun to pull away. Lisa Nandy, Angela Rayner, Wes Streeting, all now keeping suspiciously quiet, not defending, not attacking, just waiting, watching, strategising. One leaked email between senior party organisers describes Operation Winter Break, an informal name for a coordinated effort to force Starmer into emergency talks during the recess period. Some want concessions, others want resignations, but the hardcore faction, they want blood, they want him out before the next general election, not after. Before, because they believe that if Starmer leads them into the next campaign, he'll carry with him the stench of weakness, of moral cowardice, and worse, of betrayal. But Starmer isn't retreating, not yet. According to insiders, he's furious, not humbled. He blames his staff, the media, even the public's emotional overreaction. In private, he's said to have raged that the booing in Parliament was staged, that it was a political stunt. But the footage doesn't lie. The anger wasn't orchestrated. It was spontaneous, raw, and real. Now the Prime Minister is seizing the opportunity. Rishi Sunak has begun quietly rebuilding his authority, exploiting Labour's implosion to position himself as a calm, steady hand, despite being the one struck down by the court ruling. In a twisted irony, Starmer's silence may have saved Sunak's political skin. The Tories, battered and bruised, have been given a second wind, handed to them not by strategy, but by their enemies' paralysis. And what of the monarchy? Even there, tremors are being felt. Palace sources, though officially silent, have expressed grave concern over the constitutional mess. One insider described the moment as a historic fracture of public trust in governance. Another hinted at private correspondence between Buckingham Palace and party leaders, urging calm but warning of consequences if the chaos continued to erode national confidence. When the Crown starts paying attention, you know the crisis has gone too far. As the days stretch into a week of unrelenting pressure, the Labour Party is standing on the edge of something historic. This is not just a leadership dilemma, it is an identity crisis. What does Labour stand for? Justice, accountability, or quiet calculation in the face of corruption? And if the man at the top can't answer that question with fire in his eyes and steel in his voice, then why should anyone follow him? The next 72 hours will be critical. Meetings are being arranged in secret. Journalists are chasing every rumour. MPs are counting support, weighing alliances and sketching out timelines. The party conference looms, now reframed as a possible battleground. Not for policy, but for survival. One former advisor chillingly summed it up. We're in the opening act of a civil war. It will not be clean. It will not be fast. But it has begun. This is the story of a man who promised integrity and delivered silence. Of a court ruling that shattered more than law, it shattered illusions. Of a nation demanding leadership and receiving nothing but strategy. And now, as the dust settles, one question remains, the one that will define not just Starmer's legacy, but the future of the Labour Party itself. There are moments in political history when the clock seemed to slow, when the breath of a nation hangs suspended in collective doubt, not because the people are confused, but because those in power are. And now, as Parliament braces for its return, that moment has come for Keir Starmer, because what began as a judicial decision has now become a reckoning. The Supreme Court may have ruled on law, but the people are now ruling on leadership. And with each passing hour, the verdict draws nearer. Behind closed doors, panic is no longer whispered. It is spoken plainly, urgently, like a fire alarm ringing through a fortress made of matchsticks. Whips have lost control. Party discipline is all but collapsed. The Labour HQ is running simulations not of victory, but of survival. Constituency chairs are threatening resignations. Regional organisers are demanding clarity. A recent private survey, not yet released to the press, allegedly shows more than 60% of Labour members believe the party should reconsider its leadership direction before the next election. And still, Keir Starmer refuses to blink. He's dug in now, not as a strategist, but as a man cornered by the consequences of his own choices. Inside the leader's office, that aides describe the atmosphere as grim, paranoid, even delusional. Staffers are being vetted for loyalty, access is being restricted, phones checked, meetings recorded. He no longer trusts his circle and they no longer trust him. One senior official, speaking on condition of anonymity, called it a bunker mentality, worse than during the Corbyn years, because where Corbyn had conviction and controversy, Starmer now has neither. Only silence and the sound of knives being sharpened in every corner of his party. What's truly unravelling is not just political standing, but identity. For years, Keir Starmer fashioned himself as the adult in the room, the quiet professional who would restore dignity and discipline to a party racked by years of ideological warfare. He spoke of calm, of forensic scrutiny, of reason over rhetoric. But calm has now become coldness. Scrutiny has morphed into passivity. And in the place where courage should stand, there is only calculation. His brand has inverted. What once made him credible has now made him unbearable. And that inversion is fatal. Because in politics, credibility is currency. It cannot be stored.